At the turn of the 20th century, the Grand Railway Hotels of Canada had consumed all of Canada's railways in a battle for passenger rail service supremacy. The crown jewels of the Canadian Pacific were the Banff Springs, the Chateau Frontenac, and the Palliser Hotel in Calgary. For the Grand Trunk Pacific, they had the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, the Fort Garry in Winnipeg, and the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton. And following Grand Trunk's bankruptcy, the Canadian National would construct the Jasper Park Lodge, the Third Hotel Vancouver, and the Bessborough in Saskatoon. And by this time, the Great Northern Railway had flourished to become one of the biggest railways in the United States, headlined by their flagship passenger train, the Empire Builder, running from Chicago through Minneapolis and west en route to Seattle. But their president, Louis Hill, was intrigued by the concept of the Grand Railway hotels, and the Great Northern had began constructing a series of Swiss chalet-style hotels across Montana's glacier region to celebrate the raw beauty of the Rockies along their route. And by 1913, he had identified a dramatic hilltop just over the Montana border and into Alberta, above the top of Upper Waterton Lake, for his next iconic lodge. And for context, if you've never heard of Waterton, it's about an hour and change west of Lethbridge, Alberta, and the national park directly south of Banff. Plans for the new lodge would begin, but World War I brought everything to a screeching halt. That was until 1924. Prohibition in Canada had ended, and with Waterton Lakes being so close to Montana, the idea had come back to life. And outside of having a place to drink, the Great Northern had hoped that the hotel would lure Canadians southward to ride their rail lines and board the Empire Builder east to Chicago or west to Seattle, because at this time there was no Canadian railway that had reached the town site of Waterton. Construction began in August of 1926 on their newest Swiss chalet-style hotel, with the goal to have it open the following summer. And what was originally designed to be several individual smaller chalets would eventually become one massive structure. And the crews would battle howling winds so strong that they actually knocked over the building structure twice, an incredibly harsh winter, and the muddy spring roads once everything thawed. But despite the adversity, on July 25th, 1927, the hotel didn't look much like it originally planned to be, but she was finished and would open to the public. The hotel would open as a 90-room structure towering 7 stories high, composed of continuous balconies overlooking one of the most beautiful views on the entire continent, with gables and dormer windows, with its brightly contrasting colors. And the hotel would be named the Prince of Wales after the Prince of Wales himself, Edward VIII, in hope that he would catch wind and visit a hotel. And spoiler alert, he never did. And 2 years after opening, the Great Depression would hit, and although the Prince of Wales did not generate profits for years to come after opening, the only thing that saved the Prince from being a complete write-off was the tour boat that the Great Northern had built from the hotel to bring thirsty Americans from Montana across the 13-kilometer-long lake for a nice cold drink.
Julian! I don't know where I felt like I could get a little drink around here, do you, bud?
And this boat still functions today, which I will touch on later on in the video. But all this was not the wildest component of the story, and I mentioned it last week in my Best of Waterton Lakes video, but I found it incredibly odd that the Great Northern Railway officials were so desperate to get pinned that they built a hotel across a 13-kilometer-long lake just over the border. But when I looked into things, the Great Northern actually were operating pretty deep into Canada. They had the Winnipeg Limited passenger train running daily service from Minneapolis into the gorgeous Winnipeg Union Station at the corner of Main and Broadway, as well as the Cascades train, which ran from Seattle into Vancouver at their own Great Northern Station in downtown Vancouver, which was next door to today's Pacific Central Station. And don't get me started on when they moved into Pacific Central in 1960, and the city would opt to demolish the Great Northern Station 5 years later in 1965. What an absolute shame that gorgeous station isn't around today. But the point being is that the opening of the Prince of Wales Hotel in Waterton was not totally out of character, especially compared to the Swiss chalets that they had already opened up across Montana in Glacier Park. Now, 1960 would see the Great Northern sell the hotel, as well as all of their Waterton and Glacier Park assets. They would be sold one more time in 1981 to a new owner, and fast forward to today, that has evolved into the Pursuit Collection line of hotels, a US-based company that owns not just the Prince, but 80% of all the attractions in the Canadian Rockies. So they know what they're doing. And that brings us to my experience here for 3 nights inside one of the most unique railway hotels in Canada and hidden gems in the Canadian Rockies here in Waterton Lakes,